Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and this is my last chance to take care of everything that I need to take care of before I go away on vacation. Tomorrow morning I'm out of here and this is down to one more bin that needs feeding as far as I can tell. And maybe even the depopulation of a cocoon nursery that I've been running for 55 days now. I think that after that much time, it might be time to just do a final haul out and treat that as a finished batch of compost. So we're going to take a look at these two systems today. Let me show you which ones I'm talking about. They're the ones that you can see right here, labeled RWENC and blue. It's my mixed bin of red wigglers, European night crawlers, and Indian blue worms. And this is just my designation now for cocoon nursery, sticking the label kind of 90 degrees on edge. And then eventually at some point when it's really truly a finished batch of compost, up until I get a chance to empty the bin out, I'll just flip the label upside down to indicate that that's a finished container. Kind of interesting to see a little bit of mold and whatnot growing on the top surface of this so-called cocoon nursery. So I figured we would start here. If it does in fact look like the finished castings are devoid of any life, we'll just probably remove everything that's over here under the plastic, which is where the feeding collection zone was. Trying to draw worms out of the finished compost into one collection area and prepare those to be moved over in with their with the rest of their family. And then we're gonna just give this bin a nice hearty feeding, make sure it's adequate to last maybe a couple weeks or so until I get back to working on these systems. So let's get these up on the bench, starting with this one, and we'll see where things stand. So now here in the cocoon nursery, you know, I don't really know what to expect. I know we've been checking in and everything, I guess, has been looking okay. Even though we checked in 8 days ago when we last fed the other bin where the regular worm population is, here we did not feed. The actual last feeding in this system goes back 18 days. Let's just make sure we don't have any little hitchhikers here, because this plastic, I guess, will probably come back into play in order to just cover up the finished castings so they don't continue to dry and become, you know, overly dry. But we've been intentionally drying the material on this side of the container in the hopes that maybe the dryness of the material would also serve as a reason to get the baby worms that have been expected to hatch in this system up and running. Well, maybe not running, you know, but, you know, get them mobile, get the baby worms moving, looking for perhaps more comfortable surroundings to live in. I gotta admit though, even though this has just been sitting here for I don't know how long, weeks, uncovered, exposed to the air, the material is still so nice and damp. It just holds its moisture so perfectly. Even the stuff on the very top surface, you would have almost thought that it would just be dry boulders, but for whatever reason, this stuff is really, I don't know, just very, very fine, beautiful castings. Here and there I could see little jumbles of it sort of stuck together, but all of them, as I just give them a little crush, fall apart into really fine, loose material. So I think that is kind of the expectation in most people's cases. They'd like to have really, really fine, smooth running sort of castings, the majority of which would probably easily pass through the screen, no problem. I guess the only thing would be to try to, maybe using two hands, you know, sort of go through the whole pile of anything that's a little bit larger and help it break up into its little tiny component materials, which all seems to be some really nice fine castings. So far, I mean, we've been admiring the castings. I guess the real question is, did we observe any worms? So I guess that was actually a pretty good thing for us to be doing, right? Because if we'd been playing around with these really fine castings and breaking apart some of these little boulders and just checking it out in general, we probably would have seen any worms that might have still been hanging out in this stuff. And for a moment I thought I saw a worm, but it's just a piece of fabric or something. Kind of had a weird shape to it. These little white chunks, I guess that's probably mold. All in all, really nice stuff, especially after you kind of de-chunk these larger pieces. I guess once you do that, you also reveal some of these chunks of uneaten, I guess in that case that was probably avocado shell. And there's little other things and sticks and stems. I mean, the stuff ain't perfect, but it's pretty darn close to it. I'll definitely have to give it a good high rating, especially after you've had a chance to sort of clean it out and break up some of the larger pieces of it. But once you really look at this stuff, it's really, really nice stuff. So just gonna see how much of it we could continue to just scrape away from the worm collection area before we start, you know, breaking into the section where the worms are. And at that point, I guess we'll just stop, and we'll just stop trying to collect more of these castings, and we'll just treat everything else as the place where the worms have all kind of come together. And I really don't even know what to expect, you know. I mean, this was this material, I guess, I don't know, it's just a different way of thinking of it, I suppose. In the past, I used to treat it as just the bin going through what I originally started considering as a finishing stage, trying to get it to the point where, you know, all the adult worms have been removed as they were 55 days ago when the last batch of worms were hauled out of here. But, you know, effectively it's still the same material, just, you know, all the adult worms have been removed, and that whole concept of finishing was the same thing as what I'm calling, you know, cocoon nursery these days. But it's really just giving the finished castings after the worms have been relocated to do their work elsewhere, giving those castings some time, you know, so that the material can continue to break down, become finer and finer. This seems to be a rubber band. Pull that out. But yeah, I mean, other than a rubber band and a couple avocado shells, the stuff looks really nice. So let's see, you know, I don't want to keep picking away at what's already just obviously bedding and stuff that was put here to get the worms to come over. Obviously, this side of the bin is also going to have a good number of castings in it, because it's just where the worms have been convinced to move over to for I don't know how long now. How many we've got, I guess, is the real question. And I mean, here and there I see a good sized worm. That kind of tells me that little guy probably wasn't even born here. It was just a straggler left behind from when I hauled out the last of the worms. Some of these worms do appear a little bit smaller that I'm seeing now. A lot of times I just feel like I've really got to slow down a lot if I really want to see the really tiny ones. Number one, because they are so tiny, it is hard to see them sometimes. But also, you got to give them a chance to move around a little bit so your eye can catch them more easily. And obviously, a larger object moving around is always going to be a lot easier to visually track or even see in the first place. Now here, it does seem like a lot of fairly juvenile sized worms, you know. A lot of times I just wonder if a lot of these could have already been born and just hanging around within the material, or were hatched soon after the last of the adult worms got hauled out. And that they're still, you know, trying to get to that age where they're mature enough to reproduce, but none of these seem to be of that age yet. So these do seem like all fairly juvenile worms. There's a pretty small one. So I'm treating this whole shebang as a success. And what I've got here, I guess I don't know what to expect, so I don't know what size container to bring over, but I got to get something that I can haul these little guys over into their new home with. I think I've got the right size box for this. Here we go. This box always works really well for me. So I'm going to not be interested in trying to squeeze the last few bits of castings out of this material. I'm more interested in the worms that collected here. Certainly doesn't seem like a huge amount, but perhaps I'm just kind of underestimating it because they're still so small. Perhaps if every little worm that's in here was at its adult full size already now, they'd all seem much more impressive as a whole. But almost everywhere I look, I find little pockets of worms hanging out. I guess there's sections of this material that they just didn't find quite as appealing as others, and once in a while you're looking through stuff, seeing nothing, and all of a sudden you bounce into a little pocket of them. Clearly enjoying one particular something or another over the rest of the stuff that's out there. As you can see, all kinds of little bitsy worms hanging out in this stuff. Pretty good number of them, you know. I guess this is going to be my one chance while I'm doing this, is to try to get an estimate of how many I've managed to collect and haul out of here. As usual, it's extremely difficult to tell, especially when you're looking at worms that's in combination with a whole bunch of the material that they're inhabiting. Certainly no easy way to size up the worm population in this container. A lot of times I'll just go with an estimate that's kind of optimistic. And a lot of times I'll, usually more recently, go with the estimate that I get from the viewers. If you've got a sense of how many worms we just managed to collect in this container 55 days after the last of, or at least what we thought to be the last of the worms was hauled out, we've now collected X number of additional worms in less than the span of 2 months. So I guess this is just going to get covered up with the plastic. That's what I usually do with the containers that I have that are just full of finished castings at this point. And I've got a number of them too, you know. I mean, you see the trays up on my shelf. I just even showed one as an example of the containers that have upside down labels. And if you look on my shelf, there's I got 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, a couple of them don't even have the labels, but they're also containers full of finished castings as well. Huh. So cool. Definitely like this stuff, but I'm not here to fawn over a nice batch of finished castings, although it is always a kind of a nice feeling to put a certain project to bed and wrap it up and finish it off. So here's what I would consider to be one more successful cocoon nursery complete. Hauling out this last batch of baby worms. I don't even remember if I've done any haul outs. I think this might have just been one collection, start to finish, with no haul outs. So, alright, let's get this thing covered up and get the adult worms out here, figure out how much food they're going to need, feed the bin, and then I guess dump in the babies we're relocating. So, alright, let's get the adult bin out here. Okay, I guess when you're on the bottom shelf, there's always going to be a little bit of debris falling down from upper bins up above. And in this case, yeah, this is the bin that sits underneath the containers that have the holes drilled into the bottom, so kind of expected. Not a big deal though. Yeah, but there again, those bins with the holes, those are also just sitting there holding finished castings. Bins that I could actively be composting in if I just had a little bit larger worm population. Alright, these top few pieces normally don't get too damp because the only coverings are paper and newspaper. I guess in this case it was paper bag and cardboard, but I guess here too just a very faint hint of dampness, but for the most part just a dry piece of paper. Otherwise, if there was any more moisture, the worms would definitely be hanging out there. So the first worm we're seeing in this mixed container is probably one of the larger ones. The ENCs are the types of worms that occupy this bin that are the largest breeds. But now that we try to go hunt that fat worm we saw down, the one that we saw in the beginning, which was maybe this one here, we start to see some of the other occupants of the container, much thinner worms. It's my guess that this bin is primarily blue worms, but I'm sure there's, I mean, you can often see the night crawler, they just kind of pop out. But there's supposed to be red wigglers in here too, and I do believe that there's probably a good number of them in here too. This bin always seems pretty active and pretty heavily populated. I'm just kind of checking around the outer edges, And I'm really liking the material I'm seeing here. Good amounts of castings. All got nice moisture content. But you know, I'm going to try to kind of mix some of this aged, dry-ish kind of bedding into the material. Let's check out the other side too, and then we'll check out how the last feeding from 8 days ago is holding up. The castings on this side look just as nice, pretty heavily broken down. I guess it's once I gotta go down a little bit deeper. Here and there I see a couple worms squirming around. Not bad. Here too, I think just because it seems like it is almost like practically all rich castings, might be a good idea to sprinkle a little bit of bedding down into there as well. That's just been the theme here on my channel lately. All my bins are just getting flooded with bedding. Super generous with the bedding nowadays. I think the bins all look really good as a result of it too. Alright, all we've got left now is to see how the feeding from last time is holding up and gauge how much of a portion I should bring down from the freezer. So once we figured that out, I'll take a short break and head upstairs to bring down stuff that we could feed these guys with. I see leftovers, and one of them is some kind of citrus, probably half of a lime. Yeah, I had 2 half of limes. There's the other one. So 8 days later, not much happening with the limes, but it'll go. It'll go over time. And on either side, okay, now I'm remembering. On either side, I believe we had rice or bread. Wow. Something's really sticking together over here. Something that's a little bit unusual. This has got to be the bread. So I'm really not seeing too much. Usually, ooh, well maybe it's just because they're hanging down low underneath it for some reason. I guess coming up and just taking a little nibble on it. So I don't know. I think it was only bread that was put into here last time. So I can't imagine what else they'd be there for. So maybe it's actually doing a lot better than it looked at first. Just got to check it from below. Okay, it's interesting. I don't even know. I mean, that's a good amount of food left over, or so it seems. As we continue to plow across, on the other side of the 2 limes, the other starchy thing, besides the bread over on this side, the other starchy thing that we fed with was some old rice. So it was meant to be sort of a little runoff to see which of the 2 sides would become the most popular and most quickly consumed. But we already saw that there's a lot of worms on this side, on the bread side, working hard at breaking the stuff down. Some of these chunks are pretty big though, so I figured any ones that I'm kind of handling, I'm also at the same time seeing if I can sort of fracture them, expose their insides a little bit, increase their overall surface area. Just by breaking them in half, you do a great deal to increase the surface area of the material. So I would give this bread feeding high marks. It does look like the worms have really come in and started enjoying it. Let's see what the rice is doing. I'm curious now. Can't wait to see. Looks like we also included a good amount of bedding in here too to go along with the feedings. So I mean, I would almost have to say same story on this side, no? I don't know if any one side or the other has any sort of an advantage. They both look like they're coming along really good. Obviously in the case of the rice, it's not like a bunch of old dry bread. The rice was all you know, individual grains of rice. It was all cooked. It was all leftovers basically. Here too, look at that, big wads of worms. I wonder if it's just that you go out on the edge and for whatever reason they're favoring the fact that they're right on the edge of where the food was added, but if they want they could just retreat right out into the bedding out on the sides, on the outskirts of the bin. So definitely some leftovers here too. Look at this. A whole lot of leftover bedding. I think this all this bedding was added during the last feeding. I think it'll actually work really nicely as something to complement the feeding that we're giving them this time. So we got a few leftovers, 2 halves of a lime, a few chunks of bread that I still kind of like left down in here. I didn't try plucking them out or picking them out. Same with the rice. I didn't try to pull out, you know, any of the leftovers from the last feeding. But I mean, next time I come into this bin, it's probably going to be something in the neighborhood of about 2 weeks from now. And by that time, I'm certainly not expecting to see any traces of any of that rice or bread at that point. So I figured just kind of blending it in as part of creating a little bit more space over here where we can apply today's feeding is it's pretty much what we need to do. There's some more of that bread. Well, I guess I did collect some of these pieces of bread. Let's make sure they're back down in here. Could even spread them out a little bit. Bring some of the rice over here. Starch bonanza. And hopefully maybe by the next time we come down here we won't see any leftovers of this cut in half lime. Oh, I mean, it feels like it wants to break apart, and there's a good amount of moisture here. I guess maybe the acidity of citrus maybe kind of driving the worms away a little bit, although you would think they would brave the acidity for the nice moisture that's held within that fruit. I think within the next 2 weeks, between now and the next time we check in here, we're probably going to see those pieces of lime vanish as well. Alright, I think this is the time where I need to go get some food. I think I could be pretty generous, I'm not going to go overboard. And then at the end we can release these little guys. Once again, if you've got an idea about how many there are in here, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts. Give me your guesstimates. Pretty routine. It's just about 2.5 or so large handfuls of whatever came out when I reached into my bag. You might be able to tell what some of it is just from looking at it. But there are not very many large pieces. There was this one chunk of lettuce with a piece of corn cob stuck to it. I think it's lettuce or some sort of leaves. That seemed like the largest thing that came out when I reached into the bag. So we're gonna make this into today's feeding. I've also got something I've been looking forward to getting consumed by the worms. Stuff that's been sitting around for a really long time. It's a bunch of old coffee. So I wanted to start out with sticking to my theme. And my theme lately is bedding galore. So let's give them 2 handfuls. How does that sound? Because don't forget, we've also got a good amount of bedding that's still left over. I think, did I pile it up all over here now? Yeah. So we've got some leftover bedding here. Definitely, definitely good stuff that we can maybe even just toss right in. I don't know, what should we do with it? Just use that as maybe sort of a top cover after we add it. Just want to break them up a little bit. Sometimes I want to kind of mix a little bit of something in alongside the shredded paper so that the paper little sheets, once they start to get wet or whatever, don't start sticking up against each other. So I've been trying to mix some stuff into the shredded paper each time I apply it, so it doesn't just end up as like a big wad of, you know, stuff. So good amount of coffee today. I look forward to dumping out that entire quart container. I don't know, sometimes I tear these things up too, whatever. Doesn't really matter too much. Eventually, you know, next time you come into the bin, probably after you place something like this in, it will have already started decomposing and softening up, and maybe it'll just start tearing under its own weight just from you bumping into it next time you see it. So it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, I don't think. At least not what I've seen. So I'm going to take pretty much this entire feeding here and drop it right in. I think this should be good. And I guess the nice thing about being generous with the bedding too is that if you're going to be away and the worms for whatever reason just go nuts and eat up everything you gave them, the bedding is always there as a terrific standby that they can eat. After all the quick, easy to eat foods are all gone, they'll have the bedding. And sometimes there's also bits of food that just take a while anyway, such as these corn cob bits. The fact that they'll be scattered all about and probably still here when we next check in. That'll definitely make for a good feeding area. Stuff like these little tiny bits of stuff, the lettuce leaves, the tomato bits, all those things are the sorts of things that I believe are just going to get gobbled up right away. 1, 2, 3. It's like there too. That coffee filter might have just been in here whole, but I think these are all bits of it at this point that are sort of fragmenting on their own. I'm not sure. Maybe I tore it up. I don't remember. So all this old bedding piled on top of the feeding area should make for a real cozy spot for the worms to come hang out in. The other bedding that I plan on adding, oops, but you know what? I almost forgot to add the extra thing I carried down here with the hopes of doing away with it. I guess this was really kind of going to be that extra amount that makes me feel like I semi-overfed in a way, just by adding this much stuff. It just feels like there's a pile of this stuff stuck in here and I can't seem to get it to come out. That's alright. I'll have to just give it some time and dry, and then I'll be able to get it out next time I feed, but at least I got a good majority of it out. Been looking to get rid of this coffee for some time now. Just been sitting around forever. You know, before we conclude the feeding, down in this layer where the foods all are, we'll put in the crushed eggshell. That's my form of grit. And, you know, there's pretty much not enough in this container to try to save any. We'll just dump out what remains. And I got one more where that came from. So we've already inspected the outer edges of the bin. Things looked great. We even gave the outer edges a nice boost of extra bedding. I think that's going to help a lot as well. So now we'll just turn to these outer edges to help us cover up. So we'll just scoop some of that material out towards the middle to give ourselves a good cover of the feeding area. Yeah, the feeding area, I guess at this point is pretty... I don't know what this is. I guess it's probably breaking down, whatever it is. I'll leave it be. So yeah, everything looks really good here. Leftover food here, an old mango seed. Put that where it belongs in the feeding area. Very nice. So, just to give this bin a nice natural feel and look, I think we'll drop on some leaves. But you know what? That's usually a final step, right? Let's first take care of releasing our relocated worms, the babies from the cocoon nursery. I want to get these little guys, we'll drop them in here once they've had a chance to sort of, you know, acclimate and make their way into the environment. We'll cover the whole shebang up with the fresh leaves after that. Because this stuff here should be pretty cozy for them to nestle into. So that's kind of what I wanted to provide for them before I turn them loose in here. Hey, what's with this guy? It's a good sized worm. Wants to climb the walls and get out. You know what? Stay put. You could be the welcoming party. Here comes the babies. Be nice. Alright, let's make sure we didn't have any that stuck to the container. Let's see any. But I'll double check later. Right now I just want to sort of spread this stuff out. It looks really nice. It's got a lot of extra bedding still remaining in it. Little bits of, I guess this is even, what, paper maybe? Most of it seemed like leaves though when we were checking it out earlier and we were extracting it from the nursery bin. But that's kind of nice. I think, I don't know, maybe a few hundred. I'd love to hear everyone's ideas in terms of how many worms they think I just released into this container. Because they're all over the place. There's a lot of little ones too. And I'd also like to sort of just factor in the possibility that there's a whole bunch that I'm not seeing just because they are so tiny. But as I just sort of sit here and slow down and I look, I could see little worms all over the place. All hopefully getting nice and cozy in their new space. Okay, I'm going to be covering up here now. I think we're done. So, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be on vacation for about a week or so. So once I get back, this one will be tended to eventually, but it'll probably be the last of the bins that I tend to when I return. I think when I get back from vacation, I'm going to start with my outdoor bins, because those are the ones that have gone the longest so far without any sort of feedings or check-ins. So they're the ones that are more or less due. But let's see. Cover up and put away. That's all that remains, right? So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please let me know. I'd really love to hear, and just do so by giving me a thumbs up. It's always really appreciated. And, you know, if you haven't done so already, you might also want to consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Take care.